I'm clicking it. All right, so we should be live right now. Welcome to people that are watching. This is our first attempt at a live stream broadcast hosted by the Scientific Coalition for UAP. Welcome to people that are watching. Oh, sorry. This is our... I had my computer going there too. Yeah, so hosted by the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. It's the first time we've done this, so there might be some kinks to work out. And we appreciate people that are watching. If, as our discussion's going on, if folks have any questions they want to throw up, feel free to do so. I understand that on Twitter you cannot post questions, but we have a YouTube link as well, and you can do comments on that. And I see there's already some people there. So my name is Brian Miller. I'm an SCU member. I'm the non-scientist who's here today. Everyone else here does have a scientific background, and maybe we can just start off with some brief introductions, and Robert Powell will be joining us in a few minutes. But Bruce, do you want to introduce first, and we'll just kind of go around real briefly and then get started?
Sure. My name is Bruce MacEvoy. I'm a retired executive, I guess you could say. I have a degree in social psychology, PhD, worked as a academic for a few years, a business consultant, worked in the internet for a while, amateur astronomer, published the Cambridge Double Star Atlas, and now I'm exploring UAPs, UFOs.
All right. And Peter? And I think you're on mute, Peter, it looks like. And Matt, you are
learning how to unmute here. Yeah, I'm Peter Reali. I'm a member of the SCU. I'm a board of directors. And my background is I was electrical engineer. I'm retired now. Worked in Silicon Valley many years. Have a master's in electrical engineering. And retired, I got interested in pursuing something that I thought about for years but never had time. So,
all right, thanks, Peter. And then Matt.
Hi, I'm Professor Matt Szydagis. I'm at the Department of Physics at the University of Albany, and my primary research focus is experimental astroparticle physics. I'm an active researcher in the field of direct detection of dark matter, but I've also begun to work a great deal on UAP, starting with SCU. I've been an SCU member for a couple of years, and I'm also a member of the board of UAPX.
All right. Well, thanks, Matt. And when Robert Powell gets here, we'll pop him into this discussion. So the format here for this is our first one, so we're working out some kinks, but we sort of came up with some ideas or topics to discuss. And so we're just going to kick those around, and people can feel free to comment. I can see people on the chat screen, and if anyone has any points they want to make or questions, we will try to work those in as well. And we'll just kind of see where the discussion goes. The general topic of this was UAPs, Enigma versus Stigma. And obviously, being the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, we're going to keep the discussion obviously focused on the science of this emerging field. So we circulated some questions and ideas, and just as a starting point, one of the ones we agreed on to start out with would be this, and anybody can feel free to jump in on this. How best can we scientifically study UAPs? And, along the same lines, what are we studying exactly, and what kind of things are we looking for at this point in time? And I don't know if anyone wants to take a first crack at that.
I think we should try to use as many different types of sensors as possible and try to observe the phenomenon ideally from as many different angles with similar sensors as possible, so that you can more robustly use geometry, trigonometry to estimate size, shape, velocity, and acceleration of things. But that's only a starting point.
Yeah, well, okay. I kind of went for. I absolutely agree with with Matthew. I kind of went for the low-hanging fruit. It seems to me that the kinematics of the object, I mean, with cameras and stuff, it would seem like the easiest way to observe something anomalous, which would be, in my mind, acceleration and velocities and power as well that required to do these things. And I think what is needed, I'm writing a analysis of a UAP event right now, and one of the questions of the peer reviewers was, how would you recommend to a scientific community to go study these things? At the conclusion, what would you look for? You know, and it's really tough. I mean, you know, if you think about, just go, okay, I recommend the scientific community study UAPs. How do they go about it? You know, it's kind of baffling. You know, first, you know, they don't show up all the time. They're kind of like meteors or something. You know, they're not always there. And what do you tell them to look for? And so that was and the easiest thing, I think, is with cameras. You know, and you know, parallax, maybe 2 cameras or something. You can get a 3D. You know, you can get a 3D tracking of the objects, and under good circumstances, you know, get their acceleration and those kind of things, and look for, or hovering. An object that's just hovering and has no aerodynamical features, you know, that to me is the most straightforward. And then, of course, you can add to that all sorts of other, you know, you can measure, you know, different kinds of radiation and, you know, like Matthew talked about. But short of that, you have the problem of these things show up anywhere. You know, I mean, and they don't show up all the time. So you need a lot of stations, and they need to be low cost. It costs a lot of money. It's going to cost a lot of money, and you need an effort. Government or something has to supply enough funds to put out hundreds of stations around the country, I think, that are running for a couple of years or something to catch something. And I think like A.V. Loeb is trying to start to do that, and he's got, you know, some money behind it. But I think that's the kind of effort, kind of like astronomy or SETI or something like that. You know, the kind of effort they put into it. You know, it's not going to happen by somebody coming out with a cell phone camera and seeing a light in the sky. You know, it's going to have to be a disciplined effort. So that's kind of my thought on it.
You're muted, Brian.
Looking at the literature, it seemed to me that actually UFO phenomena are siloed. There's a large quantity of sightings that are entirely electromagnetic phenomena. They're in the air. You don't have a clear idea how far away they are. You don't have any way to correlate angular size with physical dimensions, but you are getting radiant flux. You are getting a certain amount of energy, and you can see the pattern that it makes in the sky. So actually, let me break here. Robert just jumped on. Why don't we get him involved, and then I'll finish my comment.
Hi, guys.
We're doing intros, Robert.
All right. My name is Robert Powell. I'm an executive board member with the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. My degree is in chemistry, and I worked in the semiconductor field, and I have been studying the UAP subject for, gosh, I guess almost 16 years. So there's a short synopsis.
All right.
Robert, we were all just responding to the first question that was sent around, which was how do we study UAP scientifically? And I was just starting on my answer. So if you take the category of just electromagnetic phenomena that are measured, there are different things you can do with that, separate from the kinematics. One is a basic population study. How many actual visitations are there in our atmosphere in a year? There are ways to estimate the population size that have been developed in the domain of animal behavior. Population statistics based on you see a small number of animals in a small number of situations. What do you project the total population of that particular species is? We can look at behavioral contingencies. If you see 2 UFO together, how is that different from when you see one? If you see a hover, is a hover followed more often than not by a particular kind of follow-on behavior, such as a rapid vertical ascent? These are very basic kinds of behavioral questions you can ask about the phenomena. It's separate from any issue of mass and energy consumption. But it's important, I think, to understand that a lot of what we know about UFO at present is entirely based on electromagnetic data, principally in the optical range, and that we don't really have a lot of information about them using all of the other tools that are available to us in physics and chemistry and in mechanics and quantum theory and so on and so forth.
Robert, do you want to chime on that too, Robert?
Sure. I guess my view is to scientifically study the UAP subject. I mean, it's been going on for 70 years. One plus that has occurred in the last few years is that the stigma associated with the subject has begun to dissolve. So that makes it more prime for the academic community. And the military has probably studied the phenomenon for many years. But I think the only way to move forward scientifically is basically for Congress to provide money to the academic community to study this phenomenon. I don't believe that we will ever get a solution out of the military organizations because their concerns are with national security. And I think the only way to move forward is collecting hard data. And I think that needs to be done by academia.
So, Robert, I'd like to follow up. That's an issue that comes up a lot with the government seems to have a lot of good data. Why do you feel so strongly about that we're just not going to see it from there?
For 2 basic reasons. I mean, some reasons are legitimate national security reasons, but I think predominantly the reason is whether it's UAPs or any other subject, the government organizations are large bureaucracies, and they're not big on providing data to the public. So to get the proper radar data that would be necessary or data that was collected through EM on various EM frequencies, I just don't see us getting it. And furthermore, those type of measurements, when they're done in academia, you have calibration, you verify what you're doing before you do it. You make sure that you have the necessary equipment. Well, in the military organization, it's more happenstance. They happen to be someplace, a UAP happens to show up, they happen to get some measurements, but you don't have nearly the controlled environment that you would have with academia studying the subject.
Does anybody, for those of you that have done active research and stuff, one thing that I wonder about is it going to be very difficult to get a controlled environment given the fact that you can't really do this inside a laboratory, right? I mean, isn't this going to be a technical challenge that is really going to be hard to work with, or how do we go about solving that?
We've already solved that problem in different fields of science. For example, there's only one universe. You can't put it in a laboratory, it's not reproducible, can't reproduce the Big Bang. And yet we've learned so much from studying the universe. So what we need to do is take lessons learned from fields of science like that are more observational versus experimental. Sure, you can't put in a lab. That just makes it harder. It doesn't make it impossible. Look what we've learned in astronomy from only one data point, one universe. We've learned the age of the universe. We have very good models of its size and shape. How do we get all that from just one data point? It's because what you need to do is you have to. It's a painful process. You have to figure out, what wavelengths, what type of what is the primary channel that carries the maximum amount of information that for a given phenomenon, to put sensors that give you that information. For the universe, it turned out to be microwaves. Discovery of the cosmic microwave background radiation changed the game, and suddenly we went from armchair philosophy of like how old the universe is to knowing the age of the universe to several significant digits decades later. So I think that we just need to take lessons learned from observational sciences like astronomy and cosmology, where there is no laboratory, there are telescopes.
Yeah, I think that astronomy, and I think also geophysics and seismology is a good example. Like measuring earthquakes and stuff. They put stations around all over the place in earthquake areas. I think California has hundreds of them. These remote stations that are collecting, statistics and actually sending in real time into a laboratory. And I think that kind of a model is what we need for UAP. The UAP is not going to show up in the laboratory, but the data can get into the laboratory in real time. But again, it's quite an investment. Like Robert said, this has to be put on as a priority. And so I think from my perspective, what the SCU is trying to do is show that this is a valid area of study. That really is something here. It's not just pseudoscience, and not, there's a real phenomena. And why should you be interested in it? Well, it may be new physics, something that's you can learn from a sociological point of view. It could be that if these things are, if the extraterrestrial hypothesis is true, this could be one of the world's most, one of the biggest discoveries, in history. I mean, by far, and would have tremendous implications for our future and stuff, which I have to say is really very interesting to me. I mean, I think that's probably my most, interesting area about this thing is but you have to tamper down your emotions and stay logical and, try and, be reasonable about it and be scientific and not let what you want to find interfere with what we do find. Whatever it is, it's interesting, I think.
Peter, can I interject here? You have alluded in a couple of places to what was basically the paper you did on the network of independent observing sites.
Yeah.
You might just briefly sketch that out, because not all the people who are online may be familiar with that.
Well, this hasn't been peer reviewed, but I think it's fairly straightforward. I did a statistical analysis of what it would take of an ideal observation station. This is an optical camera system with two cameras using parallax to be able to determine, like what I said before, the trajectories in 3 dimensions of an object. And I go into, it's broken up, it's a system perspective. It's broken up into several elements, first I divide the country into like 10-mile square grids up to an altitude of, I can't remember now, 30,000 feet or something like that. And then I have blocks of like the, different detectors, parts of the experiment, and a certain, this thing would have to track these objects, and it'd have to have a certain probability percentage of, if an object came in to one of these grids, it'd have to have a certain percentage probability of actually starting recording and capturing it, So, and the end result is, I did a bunch of calculations based on what what it would have to be with, I think the detector is about, between 25 and 50% reliable, which is probably really good. And what came out was that in order to have, to be able to detect, to be 100% guaranteed of detecting an object within about 2 years time period, you'd need about 300 to 500 of these stations across the country. Now, obviously, you can't completely fill the grid, but you'd spread them out. and that would be the probability of getting one or more objects. And it's kind of modeled on a sampling process of sampling from like a large bowl of balls and sampling with replacement, and each object, each grid is, this assumes that there's no, they'll come in any random, that where they enter is random. I mean, there's no guarantee any area has a higher probability than anything else. And the other thing is, there's about a percentage of these a year is about of actual objects is between about 30 to 50, something like that a year of real objects. The rest are all just misidentified or other things. And that's kind of comes from some of the statistics that I've been told about, about maybe 3% of the recorded objects are actual real things. Then of course you get into, this object probably doesn't come down like this and then go away. It's probably been traveling across. So some of the reports are probably the same object in different areas. So, it's like that. And so the cost, I assume the stations cost about $4,000, something like that. And of course you need a maintenance guy or somebody to go out and take care of it. And it comes out of budget like 30 million a year to run this thing, So it's a big project. I mean, not that this is correct or anything, but it gives you some kind of an idea of what you're faced with, and also why why it's so difficult, to detect these things. They're like meteors or something. They're just kind of, and of course, people believe there are certain areas where these things are coming down. I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. That's still, but even then, they don't come down all the time. They're coming in and out. So it's a place to start to think about this.
Well, Peter, I disagree with your randomness, and it's because not only are there known hotspots, but I mean, like, we applied that on UAPX, and we didn't need 2 years. We hit the jackpot in 1 week with data. So because we went to a hotspot. So I that's the only place I disagree. I think we do need hundreds of sensors and all that, but I think it's a waste of money and of sensors to assume they're uniform when they're not uniform. Because there are hotspots, even when you account for things like population density, there are hotspots. We mentioned.
I think these hotspots are not UAPs. I think there's some kind of atmospheric phenomena. Because I think you look at the long history of 70 years, these things are I'm looking for the machine-like objects.
Yes, I know.
You take a ball of light in the sky, it didn't convince anybody. It's sorry, but it's just not going to. You need to have some kind of something that is understandable and or not even understandable, but pretty obvious of what it is, and that's what I'm looking for in this calculation, or in this thing I did. So,
so a radioactive ball in the sky that changes direction, that would not convince you?
No, because it could be something in a distance that's transmitting something, radar antenna, moving around, or a satellite going over, and I mean, SETI has problems with this all the time, trying to detect, exoplanets and, looking for, and it turns out almost all the time they're just some kind of radiation, or EM from something local or a satellite or, ground stations or anything. It's really difficult. I mean, you may be correct. I don't know, but I mean, I think it's, I know that Ryan Graves, he flies out there and they see these things all over the place all the time. That doesn't fit the characteristic of UAPs over the history.
Radio stations don't produce gamma rays, Peter. I'm sorry.
Gamma rays come from outer space, right? So
we've got a lot of people in the chats that are putting things in it, and I want to throw something in, Matt, that I think maybe kind of might touch on something you're mentioning here, talking about hotspots. And somebody had raised this point, which I think is interesting. They had said, what if we're trying to study something that doesn't want to be studied? And I think that one thing that is perhaps interesting, and maybe, Matt, this gets into hotspots, I don't know. I'm always I'm more pro ET perhaps in this group, but if we are studying something that is intelligent in ways that we don't quite comprehend, does it make it different than a lot of other standard things we studied? And when you talk about hotspots, is it possible that these things are coming up in certain places for reasons that we don't understand? I mean, or do you have any thoughts on why there might be hotspots, Matt?
I mean, that would be like potentially, if we are talking about non-human intelligence, that would be like an ant asking, why are people walking on the sidewalk? It might be, we have to avoid anthropomorphizing, because if we are potentially dealing with intelligence that's superior to ours, they may have logic and reasoning that is so far evolved beyond ours that it's a daunting task to attempt to ascribe intentions. I mean, we can, but I'd rather be humble, especially since we might not even be talking about intelligence in many cases. Peter has pointed out, you could have things like ball lightning, earthquake lights that were once considered pseudoscientific. So there are also naturally occurring atmospheric phenomena that can be in the mix here. So we don't want to say that like every glowing ball is a machine, as Peter was saying. Got to be careful. But if some tiny fraction are, then we might not have the tools, even with our primitive, brains for dealing with an advanced civilization, to even venture a guess as to why they would prefer certain areas.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, if what is an alien? Something alien, may not be like human at all. I mean, you can look at an ant colony and a lot of I think they're evolutionary anthropologists or something, look on it as a single individual, where the individual ants are like cells, like, in our body, and they work towards the queen or what the overall objective is. Now, an intelligence like that was advanced, maybe over billions of years, it became fantastically advanced. What would it think of the Earth, or what we're doing? It probably has no interest at all, or would think completely differently, and their interests may be so far beyond or alien to what we are that we can't even begin to understand it, but then again, they may be like us, I don't know, but I think we have to be humble, and not assume that that what they're doing has is comprehensible to us, or that we could just say, well, they're obviously come down here to look for the White House, they couldn't find it, so they're flying around,
I'm looking at the 70 years of sightings. I have real difficulty finding anything that's very intelligent about UFOs. I mean, they sit in the middle of roads, they strafe commercial airliners, they loiter over airports, they molest military fighters, they wander around in the sky, they appear over military bases and recreational beaches. I mean, show me something that UFO are doing that is intelligent.
Like the Tic Tac, what was it doing? It was going up and going up and down. But I mean, you don't know. They may have been measuring something, or something we don't even understand. I mean, it's something that is important to them, and to us doesn't mean anything. Maybe. Well,
my dog scratches the bedding before it lies down. I don't understand why it does that, but it doesn't seem to me to be very intelligent. I mean, they could be forming complex constellations of rotating swarms in the sky. They could be coming down and leaving markings on the ground. There are all kinds of things. They could be building something somewhere that we could detect. They could be spawning.
I mean, I don't know if anybody's read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
I haven't. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's kind of funny where it starts out with the Vogons, or this alien race, and they are coming to Earth to put a transpacial hybrid highway. It's I can't remember what the term was.
Yeah.
Yeah, some kind of a portal through hyperspace, and the Earth is in the way. So they post on Alpha Centauri a notice saying that this is going to happen, and they do it for a couple of years. And since nobody responded, they just destroy the Earth, thinking no one's interested, and this one guy survives. But I mean, motivations are, it's quite a funny book. If you haven't read it, it's worthwhile.
It's a whole series.
Yeah.
Sequels.
So Bruce, I have a question.
You didn't answer my substantive request for intelligent things that UFO have been observed doing.
So I've got a question for your question there, Bruce. So if you have an object that can accelerate from a stationary position at 50 to 100 Gs, does that require intelligence?
I don't know. I don't associate intelligence necessarily with a specific performance parameter, but with a complexity of behavior in a context.
So what do you do for your dog that indicates intelligence?
What do I do for my dog that indicates intelligence? Every time I go out into the kitchen, the two dogs follow me out there barking because they know if they stage a dog riot, they'll get some jerky.
That's the dog. That's what he's doing.
Yeah. Well, I'm not the intelligent one in that situation. The dogs are manipulating me. But my point is that there is very, very scanty evidence for UFO doing anything much more interesting than sort of cruising alongside a plane as it's flying and blinking at it and then flying away. These are super, 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 super intelligent beings. Hypotheticated that have built this fantastic machine, and they've come all this way in defiance of relativity and space-time continuum and all of that to sit in the middle of the road in LaValin, Texas. That's it.
No, I mean they react to aircraft that approach them.
Sure, so do birds.
I have countless examples of intelligent reactions. What about the claim by researchers looking at the Hasselden lights that if you shine the laser at one, it changed their frequency of blinking to double the frequency of blinking, and then they turn off the laser and back to the original frequency? Or the claims of people like Dorothy Izot that she could flash a light and get a response back with a different number of flashes. How is that not intelligent?
Well, I'm not saying there's zero intelligence.
Yeah,
it's not very intelligent to change your blinking.
But you're judging what's intelligent. I mean, by some standard,
I am. Of course I am. I mean, you're judging.
I know, but I mean, it could be alien. It may be doing something that we don't understand.
No, by the same logic, we used to judge each other we used to judge that different members of the human race weren't intelligent using very similar reasoning. And so I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that reasoning. We don't know what intelligence looks like. It's an arbitrary human definition. But also, what do you mean defiance of relativity? Hang on, I've got to harp on something. I don't understand what you're talking about. Relativity helps you. It makes interstellar travel easier. So what's in defiance of relativity? I mean,
I'm sorry I pushed your button, Matthew. I have to learn to push the relativity button.
You can cross the galaxy in a few months of ship time as long as you're traveling close to the speed of light. What's the issue with relativity? It helps you. It doesn't hurt you. You don't need faster than light travel to cross the galaxy in months, even. So I don't understand what you meant by that.
Yeah, no, you're dragging me off into your
physics. I'm going to drag you off into
the room. You're going to lock the door on me and make time change.
Yeah.
Let's stick.
Can I throw something in? I'd like to include some of there's a lot of people chatting, and if it's okay with you guys, I just want to kind of summarize some stuff because there's some interesting comments in here, I think. And it's hard to get, there's a lot of chats in here, so I apologize to people if I can't incorporate your particular, but let me just generally encapsulate some of the reactions that I see people are, because you guys can't see this, I don't think. Some people are raising the point and listening. They're just like, are we trying to rely too much on human intelligence to try to understand these things? And are there kind of like, some limitations that we're just not aware of really? Because as human beings, we have never, some individuals have talked about having direct encounters. And I do want to raise a couple questions with that later because I think it's interesting. But as a collective species, we don't really have an understanding of what it means like to interact with a intelligent being from another planet. We do know what it looks like to interact with animals. We do that, but we have no experience collectively of what this means. And so this is kind of what I'm seeing a lot of people are kind of saying is like, you know, are we just trying to figure this stuff out with too heavy of a reliance on human logic? And I think maybe it's kind of like, does that resonate with any of you guys? I mean, it's, I know it's difficult when we start talking about intentions and things like that, but aside from just, and I guess maybe I'd ask it this way. Let's say that science sort of verifies that there's some objects out there that are UFOs, that are craft from other planets. What happens next? I mean, where does this thing go? Do we ever interact with them in the same way that the five of us are interacting on this discussion here? I think that's kind of what people are sort of generally raising in the comments, is just that kind of, I don't know if that resonates with anybody.
Yeah, I think, Brian, that the comments are valid. I mean, as to the reference point of how you judge and measure intelligence. But I think from a scientific viewpoint, actually, I mean, it's interesting to talk about it, right? Is this a mark of intelligence or not? But we don't actually have to worry about that initially in order to study the phenomenon. We collect the data, and if somewhere down the road we get data that indicates intelligence, then we deal with it at that point. But whether there's intelligence or not does not preclude our ability to study the phenomenon.
Yeah, I don't think there's a dispute about the fact these things show control and they're reactive to the environment, and they appear to have perceptual abilities that lets them know what's going on around them. I mean, we can't explain the Gorman dogfight or the Fravor encounter any other way, really, as far as I can tell. But the issue is, you know, intelligence has a purpose evolutionarily, and even at the level of human intelligence, it's very technical in its bias. We don't have a concept really of a spiritual intelligence that's anything like our concept of, you know, going to Harvard and MIT and solving the tough problems in quantum physics. So we're really unclear about what intelligence means here, unless it gets back to a kind of intelligence that could build a spaceship and travel to Earth from another planet.
But let's say I'm an alien professor, okay? Here's my proof to my class of how human beings are not intelligent. I would say, take a look at this planet called Earth, and here's an example of a non-intelligent species. Now, you probably guys are thinking, what am I talking about? And I'd say, look, they're killing each other in wars. They're destroying the planet with their changing climate. They just had a pandemic, couldn't figure out how to handle that, even though they had the tools. Significant portions of the population don't believe in science or facts. If I was an alien professor, that would be my presentation proving how humanity is not intelligent as an example to the class. What can you say to that, Bruce? I mean, seriously, like, why are we intelligent?
Well, you're kind of trotting out a 19th century prejudice about what intelligence is. Intelligence is always adapted to what the animal is supposed to be doing, given that it's in its natural environment. Humans, our natural environment is to all get in the hot tub together. The most fundamental thing about humans is that they speak language. Even people that are seriously mentally impaired in some way can speak language. It's a natural, very basic instinct. I think Chomsky was the first one to call it a language instinct. But you can't really judge intelligence hierarchically. That's the 19th century idea of there must be super geniuses, and the smartest guy in Europe was Goethe, and so on. Intelligence is just like the tree of life. It radiates off in all different directions. It depends on what the animal is adapted to do. Humans are adapted to talk a lot to each other and build things and go off and have adventures. That's why we colonized the world in 50,000 years and fly around in the air in machines. But ants are just evolved with a different kind of intelligence. They're in some ways very clever. They're just not humans.
Exactly. I'm saying that You could have, if I'm an alien anthropologist, I might have a completely different definition of what intelligence is, and I might judge humanity, for example, to fail my definition. In the same way that, for example, viruses fail to meet the human definition of life is another example of that. Similarly, an alien race could have a definition of intelligence that humanity doesn't even come close to matching for one reason or another.
Yeah, I think, to get back to Brian's question, would they get, what would it take to for them to, I think reframe it or something? What would it take for them to contact us, or us contact them? I think currently it's going to be up to them, because I don't think we can chase them or anything. I don't think we can even get close to them. I mean, they seem to, if these things are machines or anything, they're actually, there's some kind of intelligence or something inside them. They just elude anything that we have. We can't even get close to them, so it's going to be up to them. And if they decide they are not interested, until we advance more to catch up with them, I don't think there's going to be anything other than us just studying them and first realizing they're there. I still think the majority of scientists and public and those kind of things really don't believe they exist, and it's up to us to show they're real, and then maybe some serious study can take place.
I want to ask one question that's come up too, and then maybe we could shift into a question another question we had on the agenda about what proof we're looking for specifically. And maybe we could talk about like UAPX, Matt, SETI and Galileo, because those are some specific ones. But people have been asking on the chat about, the alleged human ET encounters, right? Because there are a lot. I mean, are those ever going to be a part of science? Because, we know those are pretty much anecdotal for the most part. There are some interesting reports of collective encounters. I know the one in Tanzania in 1994. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that one at all. I know Robert is.
The area school?
Yeah, you had a lot of, from an attorney standpoint, there's a lot of corroborating details. You had groups of people in other locations seeing things coming in at the same time. You had consistent reports among children. There's actually, interestingly, the BBC has a lot more footage on that it's never released. And Robert and we'd emailed them to try to get it, and so far no luck on that. But what people are asking about this on the chat about like that part of it is science, because what I'm hearing so far is like we're talking about studying the object part of it. Is there going to be a role for science in studying these alleged human ET encounters where people say they've had direct experiences? Is that going to be an important part of the mix as well in some level?
I would split that into two types. I mean, there's some similar to the case in 94 where you have a physical object and, the belief or, the claim that there are occupants related to that object, right? So that's one type. The other type is where people say they have this encounter and there's no physical object. It's totally, happens to them immediately. There's no proof of any type of physical craft that brought whatever being that they say they're interacting with. So I kind of separate those two out.
And I'm personally, I'm going to anger probably a lot of people in the chat, extremely skeptical of those encounters. I'm not discounting them, but I'm more in the Peter realm of the nuts and bolts, machine ship. But let me explain why I'm skeptical. This is going to anger a lot of people in your chat, but as a lawyer, you like arguments, counter arguments, like Brian. So it just, I love, there's these cases like
lawyer jokes.
Yeah, but there's cases like Tanzania and stuff. And just I would use these things, and I'm like, damn, it's disappointing that aliens stopped coming once we invented the iPhone. Right? It's so disappointing that Lonnie Zamora couldn't just whip out his phone and be like, oh, look what I'm getting, guys. Like, it's so convenient that all those encounters with beings happened before iPhones, before Android, before satellites. So I'm extremely skeptical, because if you look at what goes on in the study of this phenomenon, in my opinion, as camera technology's improved, unlike what some debunkers say, actually pictures have gotten better, and Bruce has shared things with me, showing things have gotten better. I have yet to see someone, and here's the alien abducting me, tonight. And the excuse is always like, oh, I'm paralyzed, whatever, by their mysterious race. So do I discount it all? Absolutely not. Do I say it's nonsense, so don't study it? No, because then I would be no better than the debunkers. I'm a skeptic. I'm not a debunker. What I want to do, many people who claim to have experiences claim to be repeat experiencers, where they've been abducted multiple times. Great. Camera in the bedroom. Oh, no, that doesn't work because the aliens mess up the electronics. That's still data. Great. If it's fuzzy for several hours every night with no explanation, that's data to me. That's great.
Yeah.
So why don't we have a mass campaign? I would have a mass campaign, not just like Galileo Project and UAPX. If I had infinite money, I would have a campaign of cameras in every bedroom of every claimed abductee. I wouldn't discount them. I wouldn't say they're all crazy, they're insane. No, I would treat their stories with respect. But I want to get the hard evidence. Telling me you were abducted by aliens last night, that's not good enough. I'm a scientist. Let's get the evidence. I'm open-minded. I'm open-minded to the evidence, and I want to be proven wrong. I want to be proven wrong on this, but I'm very skeptical of the whole experiencer and abductee phenomenon. There's already a paucity of evidence for intelligence, like Bruce was saying, we're just seeing machines, objects. It's a whole nother level down of less evidence for the next level of experiencing the beings. So again, Tanzania school, too bad no phones, right? Too bad it was 1994, right?
Hey, let me raise something on that point too. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I guess in my mind, at least, first off, I think there's a broad range of different types of experiences out there. I mean, I know, like, I grew up in Gulf Breeze, Florida, and during the sightings down there, I was in high school, and the main person who, I don't know, you guys familiar with Gulf Breeze sightings?
Oh yeah.
Right. It's I remember as a kid, they had one of the shows was there, and we thought it was a big deal. But and I actually knew the editor of the Sentinel that broke that story, and I know for a fact that what happened in that case, and I can just speak to this one because I have personal knowledge, was that he was getting all these weird photographs from people that he was like, people just said, hey, I'm seeing this. And once he got enough of it, he was like, I'm going to publish this stuff. Now, there was a guy there named Ed Walters who said he was getting repeated contacts and things like that. And some people later thought that he was, crazy or whatever the case may be. But I think there's also a broad range of different types of situations, right? I mean, like the Barney and Betty Hill thing's a little bit different than that, right? I mean, they had a different set of encounters. And so, I mean, I hear you're saying, Matt, but, and I would just say from a standpoint of the 1994 Africa encounter, that regardless of whether cell phones were present or not, you can't discount that there's a lot of corroboration going on there. And, the kids there, one of the things that struck me about that, and I'm really hoping one day to be able to get more of that footage, was the kids were saying they were getting images in 1994 from these beings that was saying, you guys are screwing your planet up. You're doing these things. Now, how would a kid in Africa start thinking of that stuff on their own? I mean, I'm not saying that it definitively proves something, but is that just random hallucination? Because if it isn't, and if there was something there, I think that's interesting. I'm just wondering if there's any way that we can study that stuff at all.
I like the Tanzania case because I actually am, like I said, I'm open-minded. I'm willing to hear the arguments there because it is very, very, very intriguing. That ties into my earlier point about the alien anthropology class of us destroying the planet. But the thing is, again, there's a prosaic explanation there, which is, you said, well, how would they think of that on their own? It's Africa, which has been destroyed by imperialism and colonialism. Of course, they're going to think we're destroying the planet. Now, here's something you'll like. Here's a positive argument for your Tanzania example. Did you know, I spoke to my cousin who was actually a professor of psychology. No one's actually proven mass hallucination. There's actually no such thing. If you have a hallucination, it's personal to you and your brain. You can't hallucinate the same thing as me. Mass hallucination or mass delusion is actually made up. I've tried to find a peer-reviewed paper on it, and the longer I dig and deep, I'm like, this is all nonsense. And I love it how we try to say UFOs are nonsense by replacing it with another thing that's nonsense. If I'm wrong, I've been begging now for months. I would love a psychologist or psychiatrist to prove me wrong. Prove to me how mass hallucination works, because it doesn't. The only way mass hallucination would work would be if telepathy were real, which it isn't. So, right, if I hallucinate and I telepathically transmit my hallucination to you, like, I mean, you can do suggestiveness, right? Suggestion. So I'm having hallucination and I describe to you what I'm seeing. You might start to see it true. Can that work for 10 people? 20? Can that work for 100? No, it can't. There is no physical mechanism in the human brain for that. And I've never seen a peer-reviewed scientific study that proves that more than 2 people can experience the same hallucination at the same time. If I'm wrong, prove it to me. I would love for someone in the chat to be like, well, here's New England Journal of Medicine, 1984, or Journal of Psychology. Yeah, absolutely. These 5 people saw the same hallucination that wasn't there at the same time. There's no such thing as mass hallucination, which I think is a really important point, not just for Tanzania, but for ufology in general. Everyone forgets that mass hallucination is a myth.
Well, to be accurate, I think the term of art in the UFO literature is mass hysteria, not
Yes.
hallucination.
Yeah.
Mass hysteria actually was a coinage that cropped up after World War II because people were still apparently on. I mean, this is what Hynek gives as his initial interpretation of UFOs. That, you know, after the war, bombs, people dying, carnage, all that stuff, people are still a little jittery. My dad told a story about how he was riding on a streetcar after the war was over. A car backfired and he hit the floor, just assuming automatically it was a gunshot. Mm-hmm. So back to the aerial school, I think that there are 2 points to be made. First of all, on almost all of the UFO sightings that are really interesting, we have a very poor evidentiary record, very poor evidence. There's no case file. There's no, you know, here's the witness interviews, here's the photos, here's the documentation on the ground. It's, you know, a newspaper here and an anecdote there and a hearsay witness over here. The evidence is really bad in general, and that's something that needs to get cleaned up if we're going to do a scientific study of the phenomena. But the other thing, specifically with regard to the aerial school, was that the kids, you know, came clamoring back and said, wow, we saw this thing. The first person to interview them was a South African UFO expert. I forget her name, but what stuck in my mind was that she had a special, quote, extended interview technique, unquote, that she used to interview all the kids. And this was before John Mack came in from Harvard and interviewed the kids and saw how all their drawings were the same and so on. The only time that I know of amateur expert extended interview techniques going wrong, besides possibly the aerial school, was the McMaster's preschool case in California, where expert amateur interviews got to the kids first, and it turned out there was a worship, kids were drinking blood and being sodomized and all this terrible stuff, and it turns out it was all out of the interviewer. So for me, the aerial school is seriously polluted by the fact that this grown-up got in there in a room with kids, talked to them for hours on end. We have no idea what transpired. There's no record of the interview. There's no recording. Really, anything could have happened to the kids in that situation.
So a quick comment on the aerial school. Actually, it's Tanzania. I mean, not Tanzania. It was Zimbabwe.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah.
And actually, I've watched that video many times, and I would urge someone to watch it and turn the sound off, and watch the body language of those kids. And I'm like Matthew. I'm I'm open. But I see everything in shades of gray, and I'm not real big on, people's claims to have seen entities. But in that particular case, when I watch those kids with the sound turned off, it's very difficult for me not to believe that whatever happened was very traumatic, and to see them all draw the same kind of photographs. I find it as one of the most interesting cases related to, someone seeing.
And this is
Yeah,
follow up with the kids now that they're adults.
Right.
Well, let me actually address that. Okay. And so first off, one of the women who was there, I know where she is. She's an attorney in the United States, and I've reached out to her to try to contact her, and I just haven't been able to yet. But I did locate her, and I've read, and this is something I'm super interested in this, and I have read pieces here and there about some of the other kids who have claimed, now they're adults, and have claimed that they've had very strange psychological effects their entire lives. And I guess, there's another part of this. I mean, we can skeptically tear it apart, certainly. I'm not going to disagree with you on that. But there's also a way you can look at this, and kind of like as Robert is looking at it and applying human judgment, and see a lot of indicators that something happened here. And it couldn't have been a human being playing a Halloween hoax on somebody. Because you also had another group of people, of adults, that were all together and at the same time coinciding with the arrival of this alleged craft, saw something in the air, and they had no idea that this had gone on at the school. And they all said, hey, we saw this weird orange light going right over there at this point in time. We were all thinking, like, what the heck's going on here? And it was notable to all of them. And I guess the only thing I would note too is that the BBC still has a lot of footage that has never been released. And I kind of think the jury is still out on this one. But I mean, if you're going to say we have to have video of it actually in these things, yeah, you're not going to get that. But I tend to go with, we use judgments every day to decide if things are true or false in our daily life. And you don't always have you look at different factors to determine. And I guess my whole point in raising this is just like, is there ever going to be some place for this? And it seems to me that there should be, because if science always just says we're not going to study it, it's too crazy, there could be something in there that we might learn if we're somehow, taking a rigorous approach to it.
Well, that's what I said, put the cameras in the bedrooms of the repeat abductees. I'm not saying treat them all as crazy. I'm saying the opposite. Let's do the same level of instrumentation that we do for checking the skies, like we were talking about earlier. I'm all for it. I'm all for checking. But if there's nothing, if we find nothing, then we should not waste time and move on.
I agree.
Done, Matthew. That was done back in, I believe it was in the 90s. And I've looked at the data from that, and they basically took roughly a dozen individuals who claimed to have, occasional nightly encounters, right? And they measured everything from, light intensity within the room to EM fluctuations to humidity, temperature. I think there were about a dozen. And unfortunately, nothing, there was no data that established anything.
That's only 12 people, though.
Right.
That's a pathetic sample size. So that's not enough that's not enough to me to say, yeah, there's nothing there. Millions of people claim to have been abducted. Yeah, but 12 is not good enough.
I agree with you on the sample size, but let me tell you the logistics and all the personnel issues. I'm sure Brian can tell you about, from an attorney's viewpoint, the potential lawsuits you can get into monitoring within someone's home. So it's not an easy thing to do. And and
you're trying to prove a negative, which you can't do. I mean, somebody could say the devil showed up. Well, it didn't show up on Tuesday night, but he's over there in Texas, and you can go around the world forever and never, never be able to prove that there's nothing,
Right.
But you have 12 cases of supposedly valid things, and they were all shown wrong. It's got to put some doubt in your mind, and I think you should be skeptical. I mean, you have to be skeptical.
Yeah,
But
I've
not a small study for a clinical type approach.
Oh yeah, but the thing I've always wondered about that, because like you guys said, there's so many people that say this has happened to them, right? So another possibility that I've considered is if you make an assumption that you're dealing with an intelligence well beyond us, right? What if one possibility is that there was never any physical entity there, but it was basically their brain was controlled and the images were put in their mind, right? And so to them, it really happened. There was no way you could differentiate between someone implanting the thoughts in your head and it actually happening. And now we do not have that technology, right? But we have begun doing a little work here and there where that you can block people's memories using magnetic fields. So I can imagine in a more advanced species, if you make that assumption, capable of doing a sociology experiment on a bunch of people just to see how we react.
Yeah, but I mean, I could see there's an easier explanation, and that would just be that, people, people get into myths, and if you claim you're having these visitations, suddenly you become very important, because a certain group of people want to believe this, and there's whole areas of mythology and stuff that people believe in that may or may not be true, but I mean it can spread like wildfire.
Right.
And I think until there's full evidence, I think you have to kind of be skeptical.
I understand.
I want to get back. I just want to get back to the Zimbabwe thing, and I don't think that this only happens in the past. I think it'll happen again, and this time we will have cell phones. In 1994, if they had cell phones, there were those big clunkers, don't have cameras in them, and yeah, or maybe you have to run and get your camera, I think I think what would make you believe it? Well, if you had all these people running around and there was a disc coming down and entities came out, and you had a good recording of it and multiple witnesses, and you have all the files associated with it, I think you've got something pretty credible, And
now here's one, Peter, though. Here's something that might make you believe it without having a whole lot of data. What if it happened to you?
Well, if it happened to me, I'm going to believe it. But I mean, that doesn't prove whether that doesn't, but I'm trying to, I'm the other person. I'm trying to find out if it's true or not.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And, because there's people that see spiritual entities in their pizza, well, look at the Fatima. I don't know if you guys heard about Fatima, 1917 or something like that. 50,000 people saw, the Virgin Mary in the sky come down, and there were scientists, just regular common people, all these things. Some of them said it was a UFO, that the sun came down and changed and all this. And 50,000 people saw this, and I was raised a Catholic, and a Catholic church is a big deal, and it was like, these became saints, these three nuns that were there, communicating with this thing, so, is that real? I don't know, but, and there's actually one camera image of it. Of course, they had, imagine what the cameras were like in 1917, but, it's just kind of a fuzzy ball in the sky or something. But, there are believers in that,
Sure.
and
Remember, there's no such thing as mass hallucination. Just remember, I'm still waiting for a psychologist to prove me wrong.
That's because it's all mass hysteria.
There's no such thing. It's a myth. It's made up. I don't care.
Well, let me tell you something. I'm here in Idaho, right? And with the COVID thing, there's groups of people that believe that the vaccine causes you to be, if you have the vaccine, it's going to permanently damage your DNA, The other
That's not mass
rumor was
hysteria. That's not mass
That's not
hysteria, though, Peter.
no, but I mean it's a belief system with no proof. And there's another one that I've had people tell me that if you get the injection, the government can track you. They plant something in your DNA and you can be followed.
The government can
Well,
already.
I'm saying though that there's thousands of people who believe this. Where did they get it? They hear it on the radio, or they hear it on some. They go to some
That's
channel.
different. That's
Yeah.
different.
Would it be okay if we, could I ask a question that's a little different? Would that be okay?
Yeah, let the moderator in here.
Let somebody else, because it's, I mean, this is a topic, right, about like, what's your belief and what, I mean, there's a lot of things in there. I was curious though, that another question we had in there is what specifically would people need for scientific proof? I think this kind of ties on what we were talking about a little bit, but I'd be curious from each of you, do you have a specific standard that you think needs to be met? And then you say, yes, I think that is scientifically proven. Is that a question that's answerable?
First, we have to establish what are we proving? Extraterrestrial hypothesis? You have to tell me what are we specifically proving first, I think.
Well, let's start with so yeah, what are the things, why don't we start there? What are the questions that science is seeking to answer right now with this? I mean, what specifically are we looking for right now?
Well, like I say, I think we should be approaching this just as we would a species on Earth. We need to be asking basic questions. How many, where, when, why, just like we would any animal. What's the habitat? What's the range? What is the frequency of doing this or that behavior? We don't know any of those facts about UFO, which is...
So that's collecting more data, basically. You're talking about just observational data.
No. Well, I mean, data, how bright they are, that's data. I mean, specifically, something that we can use to aggregate, get a population number. That's, I think, a really basic statistic. Peter took a stab at this in his presentation on the Fermi paradox, whether, the Fermi paradox can be made to reconcile with the number of really high strangeness sightings that are seen in the average year. And he divided by N and somehow it came out all right. But
cut the books,
I use that trick many times, Peter, so I'm not talking back. But again, behavioral sequencing, I mean, even in analyzing bad marriages and disruptive children, people want to know, okay, if you did this, what happened next? If you approach the plane, it's, for example, Lieutenant Graves talks about approaching these objects in flight, and what they'll do is they'll drop altitude. Why don't they go up? Why do they drop? That to Matthew's point, that's data. We need to describe more what we are actually seeing, instead of starting with the hypothesis that this is a machine, launching from that hypothesis, the hypothesis that it's an alien race, and then from that hypothesis talking about the hypothesis about what they must be thinking or trying to do, or why they don't communicate with us, or all the other third-tier hypotheses, when we still aren't sure that this is a machine.
So I have a slightly different take on it. And I think it's a difficult question to start with, right? But I'll approach it from, if you're saying it's extraterrestrial, then it's not of Earth, right? So I look for, okay, what kind of data can be collected that would make me believe that something is not manufactured here on this Earth? I can't know if it came from Alpha Centauri, from Tau Ceti, or where it came from, or from another dimension. The only thing I can say, okay, I don't believe this came from this Earth. So I look for things such as the ability of an object to accelerate at 40, 50, 60 Gs and beyond, right? Because I'm quite confident that there are no craft manufactured on Earth that can do that. Second, can I get equipment that can detect that this object is moving at very high speed in the lower atmosphere, and there is no heating going on the surface of that object and in the atmosphere around it. That's another feature that tells me this was not manufactured by anyone here, because we don't have that capability.
Right.
So those are two things I look for that tell me that something's not terrestrial.
So maybe is it fair to draw a distinction between, it seemed like Bruce is talking about on one level, he's interested in sort of like what you would do with surveying wildlife in a habitat, right? Like they do that where they go out and do surveys and they look for certain things that gives you a indication about these types of things that were here. Sometimes you see they'll set up motion cameras out there and they're just basically doing a survey. Robert, you seem to be thinking that maybe science can look at a different question and actually ask, is this probably extraterrestrial in origin? And part of how you're getting, and if I mischaracterize this, let me know, but I hear you saying that you're looking at some characteristics of behavior and you're drawing on your reservoir of what you know as a human and saying, I don't know a human that could possibly do that. Is that kind of what you're saying to an extent?
Yeah, I'm saying we don't have that. I'm looking at capabilities. So I am making an assumption that the ability to accelerate and the ability to move through the atmosphere without heating the atmosphere is indicative of intelligence and extreme, technical capabilities. So I'm making that assumption that this is not wildlife or anything
Right,
like
the carbon-based life.
Right, and I know it's not a meteor, because a meteor can't. There are no atmospheric items that I can think of with those capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it would have to be. But wasn't your original question, Brian, was how would we prove scientifically that these things exist?
Mm-hmm. And then Matt said you got to first define like what you're looking for. So that's why I was kind of trying to ask you guys, like, what are you actually looking to prove specifically? I think, Matt, was that your question, right? You got to ask, what are you trying to prove? So Bruce, because more data. Robert seems like he's saying, I want to look at to see, can I prove this is extraterrestrial in origin? If I understand you correctly, Robert.
Right. And by extraterrestrial, I'm just saying it's not terrestrial, right? It's not from planet Earth. There's always the possibility, right, that there's an ancient civilization that's been here for millions of years and they live in the ocean. So I can't say absolutely that that's not possible. I mean, it is possible, but just putting that aside, I'm just saying that whatever did this is not from planet Earth.
Yeah, and I that's the low-hanging fruit that I was talking about, that I think that's probably the easiest thing to go after. Now, Matthew, he may have detected something. I don't know, because I think you're still to reveal what that's all about.
You're going to see in June at the conference.
Yeah, you can join us at our conference and find out, what it is. But I think that's, to my mind, that's the easiest thing to go after. That's hard in itself, but science never really proves anything. Math tries to prove something, but it doesn't either, because it always has axioms, so we really can't prove anything, but we can have a hypothesis that matches all of our evidence until something better, some more evidence comes along that disproves it, and then we need a new hypothesis, and that's kind of how we progress to greater understanding, and it sounds like Matthew has some.
Yeah, no, I do have a direct answer to Brian's question with one version, which is if we're talking specifically of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, which, as you guys know, even though I like that hypothesis, I don't want to talk about exclusively at the detriment of other possibilities. Like I was here for now, but in that particular example, I'll answer that. So, what would be evidence? Or someone has of extremely high resolution, high quality video. Ship lands, aliens come out. How do I know it's not CGI? It helps to have multiple pictures of the same thing from different angles. That's why, for example, what I find one of the most compelling cases was the solar eclipse in Mexico City in the 1990s, everyone's looking at the sky. You had multiple cases of people who have photographs and videos of what appear to be the same object from different angles. Okay, that's pretty darn hard to fake. It's not like arguing about this one photo. You have videos of people across the city from different angles. That's what we need, is we need such high quality image and videos that aren't singletons either, that are like two people from different angles. This goes back to Peter's point about parallax, things like that for objects. But I'm talking about, you see, disk lands, beings come out, and you have multiple angles on this. That should convince anybody. Because here's the thing. Well, here's what's not convincing. Okay, is because our trust in public institutions have eroded so much that I think if tomorrow the U.S. government is like, hey, everybody, aliens are real, no one would believe that. Right. We don't believe in authority anymore. Our trust, and let's look at the pandemic, our trust in institutions has eroded. Well, I don't want to go off on a tangent for hows and whys and sociology of that, but I think that because of that, it's not good enough that an authority figure comes out tomorrow and says UFOs are this, be it aliens or be it something else. It's Russian, it's Chinese, or it doesn't matter, because then there'll always be the counter. There'll be the conspiracy theorists who are like, yeah, they may have said it, but that was really a cover for what the real truth is, which is X, insert whatever you want for X. And so that's why I think what it's not scientific evidence is proclamation by authority. Well, first of all, never was scientific evidence, but proclamation by someone in authority is not going to do it. So I hope that at least helps partially answer your question.
Are you saying then that, and I'm as curious to as specific as possible if I hear, because I'm curious to know, because you're an active research scientist, so you're a good person to ask, right? I mean, you're in an actual lab doing stuff. So I mean, it sounds to me like you're saying that if there was a craft that came down and you had a high resolution, like a Galileo type thing, whatever Avi Loeb's working on, I guess his thing's going to come out soon, from multiple angles, and you saw something land, beings get out, that you, at that point in time, you definitely say, okay, aliens are flying around Earth. That would satisfy you.
But that doesn't address also robot probes. What if we've got von Neumann probes, unmanned probes, things like that? For that, we need to go back to the anomalous velocities and accelerations that Peter was talking about. And there's other, and what would be better though? So I would classify in that case. Let's say we're not talking about any biological entities of any sort. We've got unmanned probes visiting us. Then I would say Peter's velocity acceleration is a major first step. But then the next step would be would capture one of them and not classify the crap out of it, but actually let's, oh, hey, there's this, probe we found and it doesn't look like it was made by any country on Earth. So that would be that would be even better, I think. And that doesn't even involve any biological entities. If we got our hands on an automated probe, and it was not human made, you can check the dimensions of parts. Does it use customary? No. Does it use metric? No. It uses some other thing, And it's things like that. Things like that. We have all these claims of crash parts. Let's see them. Let's study them. Studies have been made. I think it was Robert or Peter, one of you, I can't remember which one of you presented on the mysterious magnesium.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
But I was just going to say, Matthew, I think the odds of us getting a hold of one of those objects is as likely as the rat in the professor's laboratory getting a hold of the professor's watch and examining it.
Yeah, I just think like a battleship is going by an island, right? And out comes a guy on a outrigger canoe trying to catch the battleship. It's about as much chance as we have.
Sometimes you get lucky though. Sometimes my cat could steal my watch, right? If she wanted to. Sometimes you get lucky. You just get lucky.
He might bite your wrist off and get your watch.
Yeah, that could be very risky. I don't, I think we have to be careful about shooting at them or trying to do anything to.
We've done it. We have done it, and the Russians.
I know. Doesn't that say something about human beings? That the first something they don't understand, the first thing you
Yeah.
do is shoot at it, you know.
That says something about our intelligence.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Earlier,
There you go.
lack thereof. Yeah.
So Matt, I mean, so so basically then if you did, because I was a little bit confused there, and then maybe, and I don't mean to try to pin you down, but I think you're a great resource for this. And so I mean, if that scenario occurred, you feel convinced though, the landing, the beings come out, because then you went on the Newman probes and stuff, and I kind of got lost. Like, would that be enough for you as a scientist? And I'm not trying to single you out, but you're the guy to ask here.
I was trying to come up with an alternative scenario, because who's to say, even if things were extraterrestrial, who's to say those are biological entities? I was telling you case B, where they are extraterrestrial but not entities. You just have a bunch of robotic probes or something, and that was a separate case where I was saying then the evidence in that scenario would be different, because there you don't have beings walking out saying hello, and so you have to have a different types of evidence in that scenario. So there's no contradiction. I was talking about a separate possibility where you don't have any beings.
But it seems to me like this makes it very, because the thing I'm curious about is like, what proof do we really need, and like, what difference will it make? Because one of the things that I feel like I see a lot in this field is like, it's almost impossible to get a clear idea about what will constitute sufficient proof, and then what difference does that make?
Well, there's no such thing as sufficient proof. We already said that earlier. That's a matter of opinion in every single field of science. Okay, in my own field of dark matter research, at multiple conferences now, we've spent hours arguing about what would be sufficient final proof of dark matter. And some people say, oh, it would be more than 5 events in this one detector. Then scientist B says, no, that's stupid. That's not enough. You need a different sensor, so you need multiple technologies. And then a third says, oh, multiple technology is not good enough. You could have 2 detectors of the same technology. So we can't even agree on what constitutes proof in mainstream science. You think we're going to agree on what constitutes proof here? We're not. So there's plenty of gray, plenty of shades of gray here on what constitutes proof. And like I said, proof of what? Because to me, I entered this field thinking, first thing we need to prove is start agnostic, forget extraterrestrial hypothesis, all those things. And I just wanted to start by proving that there's something real going on. It's
Right.
not on people's heads.
Right.
And
Okay.
I think, why are we not past that yet? It drives me crazy that we're not past that yet. Just the other day, we had John Greenwald successfully got like the UAP task force report partially declassified. It's like there's a government right there in some of the parts that aren't highlighted in black, obviously, talking about breakthrough technologies in our skies, and you still have people arguing that it's all nonsense. Like, it just drives me crazy that there's still people, scientists with PhDs, famous scientists like Neil deGrasse Tyson, and then people who don't even have PhDs and have no idea what they're talking about, like Mick West, who are like, oh, it's all nonsense. So then the government is lying, which is a felony, by the way. Lying to Congress is a felony. So then whoever writes that UAP task force are committing felonies, which they could be doing, but that's pretty serious. Like, I still don't understand why some people are still arguing whether it's real, because in my opinion, that's so well established now. Let's move on and start testing some of these hypotheses, like the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, but I think it's coming top down. I think we've turned a corner with this DNI report,
Yeah.
the Gillibrand Amendment.
Mhm.
Senator Marco Rubio is interested. Gillibrand is. And I think Congress is actually moving in a direction to, and the interesting thing is it's moving not out of search for knowledge, but out of fear, which always motivates human beings. It's out of defense, thinking that, you know, these things can come down to your ships, and nobody seems to be able to do anything about it. Pilots are seeing them and they're dangerous. You know, I mean, not that anyone's collided with anybody, but they're a distraction to pilots, and it's going to cause an accident. And, you know, and plus we don't know what they know. I mean, I'm not, no conspiracy here, but I mean, they may have a lot of movies and stuff that, as Robert talked about, the stuff whatever they don't know gets classified, and, you know, and then it just sort of goes into, you know, goes into some hole somewhere, and no middle management bureaucrat in the defense industry is going to win any points by releasing something without his manager's approval, and that goes all the way up, so the only way anything happens is the top down, in this structure that we have.
I hope we've turned a corner on it, but the documents that Matthew's referring to, when you look at those, one of the items that's redacted is the shape of the objects. Mm-hmm. Now, when did the shape of an object become a national security issue?
I'll tell you my hypothesis on that, which is I'll tell you exactly why the shapes are redacted. Because the pictures, what if they're pictures of like, here's a flying saucer shape, here's a cigar shape, here's that. Then you have a lot of angry people who are like, wait, so we're not crazy and we haven't been mass hallucinating for decades? And basically, if they hadn't redacted the shapes, they would have been admitting that people who claim to see flying saucers or Tic Tacs or cigar shapes or ellipsoids aren't crazy. And just think about the societal and political implications if they hadn't redacted the shapes.
Well, that's true, but that's not a justification, because that is not a national security issue.
It's not a valid justification.
Well, I disagree. I don't think. First thing, I think most of the people really don't believe. It's like you said earlier, Matthew. People don't believe government stuff anymore. Mm-hmm. They just know trust has been broken there. But I think at the higher levels, they're worried about what happens if suddenly it's revealed that there's these. This is really getting out there. Okay, it's because we're trying to be. We're making the assumption that they actually have these things, and we don't know that. So I'll say that, that they have information that there's an alien, these things are real. But if they were, I think that this could potentially unglue society. I mean, many of the people have, the only reason they trust government is to protect them. And if suddenly there's something that won't protect them or is more powerful than they are, many institutions and many people will become unglued. And I think there were studies about this that, it could cause some major problems for the government. And that might be a reason why they want to keep this under wraps. Now, I don't know that that's true, but I don't find the argument that, they were lying to us. Well, they lie to us all the time. I mean, and make stuff up. And I mean, look at the Gulf of Tonkin incident. We went into Vietnam on a complete fantasy, or and we invaded Iraq because they supposedly had weapons of mass destruction. All turned out baloney.
Can I jump in here? Because we're skirting around the edge of the issue of stigma, which ought to come up sooner or later. But the whole thing about UFO and stigma and the government lying to us and so on, that's a Cold War relic. The CIA and the Air Force got together and they said, what are we going to do about these UFO things? Mm-hmm. It's not the UFO that are a problem. They are not a threat to national security. That's been established every decade until the last decade by all of the people who have looked at it. No threat to national security, but the population is a problem. So we have to lie to the population, because otherwise they'll jam the phones if there's an attack, and then our military will break down, or whatever the CIA thought about the problem at the time. But once the government found that it could lie to the people, then, the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, the smoking gun is going to be an atomic bomb. I mean, the whole issue of stigma comes back to the fact that the government found that it could lie to the people in a democracy, not in an autocracy. Mm-hmm. But personally, I don't think the government really has a lot more information about UFO than we do in the public domain. I really don't. If we have, metallic slag that might have come from a UFO crash, then all of these reputed, rumored UFO fragments that the government has, it's probably more metallic slag. If they have photos, they probably look a lot like the photos of the object in Mexico City. And by the way, Matthew, what did that object look like? It's a black dot with little fuzzy diffusions of light on one edge. And it's a fuzzy black dot. It's not in focus no matter what kind of camera system you used. what scientific evidence does that give you? I mean, even if, the problem with the UFO is even when we get the evidence doesn't tell us enough. That's the real frustration in this field.
And that's why we need not just multiple angles, but multispectral also.
Oh, I
Different wavelengths to see, because maybe it's clear in one but not the other. But yeah, and also there's the possibility things are fuzzy because they're intrinsically fuzzy, because maybe that's the nature
Right.
of the phenomenon. Because what about these claims of plasma balls that are surely not all crazy? Some of them are atmospheric phenomena. It's naturally fuzzy. You're not gonna get a high res picture of a gaseous ball, even though and so some of these things are naturally fuzzy, and that's why the pictures haven't gotten better, even with better camera quality.
Right. But my implicit point is that we kind of have a fantasy in our mind about what really good proof of UFO would look like, and it's always forbidden planet. But if you actually look at the photographs we have, except for some weird ones that seem to resemble garbage can lids tossed into the air or straw hats tossed into the air, there's not a lot there. I mean, in terms of structure.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to get images. I think there's enough people that have described the craft that are machines that would be interesting. I think the fuzzy balls is still interesting, but from for physics, because it's some new kind of phenomena that we don't know, and that's worth studying. But I don't think that's going to motivate people to spend millions of dollars on it. We have to get over this threshold, that it's something real.
Even the plasma balls are worth studying, in my opinion.
Sure.
What if you had what if a civilization had developed the ability to control photons just like we control matter, right? So that all it is, it's like a probe. It's a probe of photons that are out, and it detects what it's looking at is the photons that bounce off me, bounce up to this object, and it's able to see me, and then it's able to send that information back to its origin.
I'm not going to go into the physics of why that's horrifically wrong. It wouldn't work. I'll give you a pass, Rob. I'll give you a pass.
Actually, yeah, we probably shouldn't go into this, Matthew, but there is evidence that you can detect a photon can affect another photon. Before that, it used to be said, no, that can't happen. But within the last few years, that has now been achieved.
Matt, I'm going to cut you off before you go into zones that no one can understand. Can I just
Twilight Zone?
Somebody asked a question. Can I put this up there? Because I think it kind of. I asked people. I said, "Hey, we got about 30 minutes left." And Matt, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I knew you're going to win that argument anyway, so it doesn't matter. But I asked people. I said, "We got like 20, 30 minutes left if people had questions." And this is one, so I'll just read it. This is from Preston, who's watching. He says, "Does the panel feel that UAP represent true anomalous objects, or is the subject being used as a cover to fix stigma and stovepiping of data that's causing real holes in the national security?" I think it's an interesting question and kind of touches on stuff we've been talking about. Anybody want to take us?
I'll just do a quick one. I mean, I've studied this for 15 years, and I put in I'd say an average of 20 hours a week on it. And there is no doubt in my mind that this is not an attempt by the government to hide national security secrets. That is not what has been going on for the last 70 years. It's a real phenomenon.
Amen.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that too. I think it's just bureaucracies are just inefficient, and I think things gets, I always, my model is, you have this bureaucracy and there's some middle guy in the middle. He's not going to release anything because, if his boss doesn't like it, he's going to get fired. And then it's all the way up till the top guy does it, and so they classify everything,
I agree. And I point
probably
out
there's probably Civil War stuff in there, it's classified,
But I agree. And I think also my earlier point about lying to Congress. That's a pretty big crime. And so if we still got the UAP task force piece of people, I know conspiracy theorists will say, of course, the UAP task force is lying, but lying to Congress is a very, very serious crime.
Mm-hmm.
And lying to the House and lying to the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Committee, that's pretty serious.
Yeah, to Matthew's point, Lou Elizondo was asked about why the government doesn't release a lot of secrets, and he didn't take the question in the direction of there are a lot of secrets we got to hide. He took it in the direction of there's probably these small spin-off groups that have done research. They've sort of stopped talking to Congress. They haven't really informed their bosses, and they're exposed to criminal liability.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the reasons why.
Exactly.
And Ron Coulthard in his book also he's got a couple of pages where he really lets rip about how these guys are criminals and they'd be shot if they ever were uncovered and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I left that out. Yeah, that's probably even a bigger reason. Yeah, the criminal liability.
Get back to the point, Matt. I know when I asked earlier, like that, it seemed to me like when I was asking that question about what are we trying to prove, that is, you're basically saying trying to prove that something real is happening and that we're not just at the level of hallucinations.
Yeah, but that's how I was saying. That's how I originally came to this field. But now with everything that's come out, I think I find it laughable that anyone still thinks that this isn't real and isn't worth funding and study. I mean, how many UAP task force reports and Lou Elizondo's have to come out? It's like, what's it going to take for people to get it through their thick skulls? This is a real phenomenon. It doesn't mean it's alien spacecraft. It doesn't. But what it means is we should be spending time and money in academia looking at it. So I want to move on to the next stage already, Brian, is start looking at those crazy hypotheses. Is it extraterrestrial hypothesis? Is it an atmospheric phenomenon? Let's actually start looking at hypotheses and stop arguing whether it's real or not. Stop arguing, oh, it's a camera artifact. Really? I already, it just drives me crazy because you guys are going to see this when present our results from UAPX. So a $5,000 brand new camera had an artifact. Really? I mean, like some of the arguments I've heard from debunkers are just so dumb. A $5,000 brand new camera had an artifact because you can't let go of your dogma and you can't let go of your previous beliefs, and it's very aggravating. Very, very aggravating. I mean, it's funny how cameras always have artifacts when they catch something you don't like. It's just really, really, really frustrating. So, yeah, I want to move on to start knocking out hypotheses. Is it this? Is it that? Is it extraterrestrial? Is it terrestrial? Why? Why not? Let's formulate actual points and stop arguing whether it's real or not, because it is.
Is that the key hypothesis? Are there any sets of key because it almost sounds like,
Sure. Peter already hit on it. Anomalous velocities, accelerations are beyond human technologies. That's a great example. That's a great example of something. Does it prove they're gray aliens driving them? No, because they could be unmanned probes, so it still doesn't. But that would help corroborate the extraterrestrial hypothesis if we had velocities, accelerations, which we do already, right? Peter and Robert are co-authors on a paper with my friend Kevin Knuth on this. We already have that evidence, but it's good enough for me to be in this field, but it's not good enough for most people, which I think was your question and your frustration, Brian. It's not good.
It might be some kind of charged plasma ball or something, that has a net charge, and they come together and they repel each other, and so they go 50 Gs.
No,
I mean, it doesn't.
That in itself would be anomalous. Everyone always
and definitely,
nobody realizes these plasma balls that we always run to is like, oh, it's not alien spacecraft, it's plasma balls. Explain to me, using Maxwell's equations, how this magical plasma ball is possible in the Earth's atmosphere. Guess what? It's not. So that in itself would be.
It would certainly be useful in like fusion or something.
Yeah, it would.
It wouldn't need magnets or anything. I don't know. You just come up with something. Maybe it's not plasma, it's something else. I don't know, a wormhole.
But it's still exciting.
You're seeing,
It's still
exciting. It still would be a tremendous breakthrough.
Exactly.
What what is the itch here in terms of the proof? Do we need proof so that we can get better funding and thereby do more science? Do we need proof
Yeah.
because your wife?
It's always money.
Yeah.
It's always money.
No, it's a chicken and egg problem, Bruce, because you can't get the proof until you get the money. You can't get the money until you have the proof. And that's why we've spent 70 years going in circles.
Well, no,
Yeah.
dance with the military in there too.
Yes.
To my point then, to your point, why don't we just forget whether it's proof or not? And why don't we just say we don't care whether other people believe they're a UFO or not and just focus on doing our knitting?
That's what I've been doing.
Well, I
So I agree.
I think all four of us are agreed in terms of, we need the kinematics, we need broad spectrum measurement.
Yeah, but it's only four of us. We need thousands of people to do this, and millions of dollars to do the job.
No. You're forgetting about citizen researchers.
Well, yeah, but I mean, if we want to do it right,
serendipity.
we're going to have to build equipment. And
Look,
where do we get the money for that?
There are solutions to this, though. So on UAPX, what we've been trying to do is design something that balances cost and effectiveness. A light sensor system. I know everyone's doing this. You're doing this, Peter and Galileo. So eventually we'll all have to merge our ideas. But the thing is, we're trying to come up with a cheap sensor system that people can buy and do citizen science with, where the data is still going to be all the triangulation, everything done by scientists. And the thing is, the philosophy we've taken on UAPX is stop arguing about the specifics and just go. Just start doing something, even if it's wrong. And
I'm all for it,
Yeah.
Go and do it. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you something then, because it's interesting, because it almost, and this reminds me, I know in our first discussion, we were talking about Thomas Kuhn and the paradigms, the emerging paradigms. And it sounds like, would it be fair to say that we're kind of like in this zone right now where there is an emerging paradigm, but it's still in this very disorganized state? It's in flux, right? There's not like UFO science textbooks that you go in, you study in class. We know there's one university now that's offering
University of Würzburg. They're coming to SCU. They're coming to SCU in June.
Yeah, well, that would be great to get a guy like that on here one day and find out what they're doing, right?
Yeah, so basically the cracks on the facade are already showing, which is a wonderful thing. You already have this university in Germany that had the guts, the chutzpah, to put the words UAP and SETI in the same phrase, which I'm sure the SETI folks love that. And they put it in the same phrase, and they have photos of camera systems. And they have on their departmental webpage, here are the cameras we're going to use to catch UFOs, because they took a vote, and they decided, you know what, it's a legit science and we're going to do it. And good for them. So right, the cracks in the facade are starting to show.
So it sounds to me then that this is a very, and maybe I'm getting this wrong, but it almost sounds like we have a very practical problem here, which is just somehow getting a lot of money to be put at this subject in academia where it can be free and open research. Because I think we would all agree on this panel that the Defense Department, they're not as curious as a scientist would be, right? It's like we said earlier, and I don't understand how someone who's approaching this from a fear-based angle, first off, it's idiotic. Do these guys really think they're going to stop a UFO if the alien wants to do something, if it's that smart? I think it's idiotic, first off. And that's just my personal point of view. But I think we could all agree that like the curiosity that's required to really study this is not going to come from an institution that has got monofocused on national security lens. And so is it just a way of like, do we have to go and find a way to get money sent to institutions in the United States?
The ball has already started rolling. You've already got the Galileo project has a massive budget, and after our
how much does it have?
What? Oh, I think I have millions. Come on. And then on UAPX, we're planning on, as soon as our movie comes out and NDA expires, we hope that our preliminary data will be interesting enough that it can start us to get us to do crowdfunding and Kickstarter campaigns and things like that to get the ball rolling. So I think the cracks are starting to show, because you already have one project that's multi-million-dollar Galileo project. Now all it's going to take is a couple more to be of the same level, and the ball is gonna, and once it starts snowballing, we may finally be turning the corner. But then you still have how should I put this? I think you have the people who are grabbing onto the wheels of change and screaming in fury and not letting them to turn. You've got people like, Keith Clore writing hit pieces on Avi Loeb and trying and just completely poo-pooing the entire field as, again, nonsense, mass hysteria, and all that. You have the people who are desperate to just keep the past, and not allow us to even look, not even check the data and see if there's anything there. So it's still going to be a struggle, but the cracks are accelerating. Those cracks are rapidly, people like Avi Loeb are widening those cracks, shoving in, I don't know, one of those like bellows from like Bugs Bunny cartoons, and like, this is your jaws of life, and the cracks are getting forced open, and it's going to be hard to close them back up this time. So that's my opinion, at least. Like Peter said, I think we turned the corner. I hope we don't go back.
I think we have, because of politics. I mean, I think I don't know how it's going to develop, but there will be some money flowing into areas of research. How much it'll come down to the general public, I don't know, but I think that general public's the last to know, right? I mean, and it'll percolate down eventually. That's what I think. But I think money is being put into it. I mean, there's the bills, like the Gillibrand bills, have been expanded, and I think millions of dollars are being allocated to expand the research and provide to Congress, the information. Now, how I hope some civilian organizations will be included in that, and that it remains to be seen. But
that's my question.
I don't think it's static. I think it's moving.
There are civilian agencies called out in the bill. There's the FAA, NOAA, NASA, and there may be another one in there I'm forgetting. But that's all under the aegis of the military. And my concern is that when they start cooperating with the FAA, all the data that they have about near-air encounters is going to be made secret.
Well, the only thing I want is a research ship full of equipment that gets to follow behind a U.S. carrier strike group. That's what I want for Christmas.
Right. Okay.
Well,
I think we need the storm chaser model, with lots of stuff around all the place looking for these things.
Well, let me interject with a thing. I'm very skeptical right now. You guys are very optimistic, and I'm skeptical, and I'll tell you why. Robert and I were at the press release for the Galileo project, and I remember, and Robert, maybe you correct me, but I thought they needed their real goal was like $1 billion to really do what they wanted to do, and they said or maybe $100 million or something like that. To really get it up, they needed a lot of money. And is you guys aware of any? Well, no, I mean, what I'm hearing you guys saying is that we need financial resources to really make this happen. And I'm hearing maybe there's some in the defense bill, or maybe we hope this amendment gives something, and maybe it goes to the FAA. And what I'm wondering is is there anybody out there that's actually, put pen to paper and said, we really need $100 million, and it really needs to go to this agency? Because when I'm hearing you guys talk, especially Matt, and I know you're kind of in the forefront of some of this stuff, is that we just do need a lot of money and a lot more scientists studying this stuff. I mean, what if we're sitting here in 10 years saying, oh yeah, hopefully next year we'll get that money? I mean, do we have any?
No, that's not going to happen. Talk to me again in June at the SCU conference, and you'll see.
Okay.
But we have turned a corner. I'm optimistic with Peter. Just watch. It's going to happen because, like I said, Avi was hugely successful at fundraising. Does he have everything they need? Of course not, because you could always need more money. But the point is that the seed is germinating now, because we now have multiple real projects, all basically all trying to do the same thing. My dream is, what I wish would happen is I wish we'd all join together, because I think one thing we need to do is unify better. My dream is that SCU, UAPX, Galileo Project, and the giant alphabet soup of acronyms of MUFON and KUFOS or whatever, all put our differences aside. I know this will never happen. I know I'm being stupidly idealistic. We'll be all united into just, if not one, just a small number of acronyms and organizations that are scientifically studying this, and have really big firepower. Like in one of my closely related fields in science, in particle physics, that's what happened, because you couldn't have particle accelerators anymore. So now there's only like 2 major experiments, and they each have hundreds of people on it, because you couldn't do it anymore. Okay. And I think that what needs to happen eventually is we all join together and put our differences aside and realize that answering the question of what UFOs are more important than our egos, than our individual egos. More important is the truth with a capital T. Is more important than whose name is first on the scientific publication, who wins the Nobel Prize. None of that's important. Especially if aliens are real, none of our petty human rivalries are important anymore, because we'd be staring in the face of the greatest discovery in human history, which puts aside all of our petty egos and rivalries.
Absolutely. I think the scale of this thing is, it may take centuries to figure out what these things are. This may be like, in the 1700s, they were looking for the origin of the Nile. It took like 100 years before they found out where the Nile River was coming from, or the Northwest Passage, that went on for years. The Royal Society was founded, went on. Maybe it'll happen in 20 years. I don't know, but it could go on for beyond my lifetime, probably. And so we have to look at this as long term, but unless we get started, and this is a serious field of study, and there's a real reason for it, nothing's going to happen. We're just going to flop around forever,
I mean, the same thing. Yeah, the same thing's true in my field of dark matter. Everyone's always like, "Oh, where's dark matter? It's not real." Ha ha ha. No, it's just that maybe it'll take a really long time to get there. The same thing happened with gravitational waves. They had their naysayers, they had their critics. Why are we wasting money on this? It took 30 years. But we finally found gravitational waves. And I think you're right, Peter. We have to be here for the long game. And that's the same reason why don't we have space travel? Because politicians just look to the next election cycle. So no one wants a moon base or a Mars colony, because everyone looks to the midterm elections, the next election. We need a long-term vision where we're not afraid to spend millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars if we have to, and take the decades, or I hope it's not that long, but you're right, it could take centuries of investment, though, of time and money to get there.
But it'll be worth it,
Yeah.
I mean, money flows to, in political reason, you look at Congress, like look at the NASA, the SLS rocket, it's not reusable. It's 1970s technology. It's about, I don't know, $30 billion over budget, and they just keep pumping on it because, pork barrel, it provides jobs to the particular states. And so they don't want to cancel it because, they won't get elected again,
Well, fortunately,
and so how stuff runs in Congress, and Elon Musk, they should just cancel everything and just turn it over to him,
Well, yeah.
We'll be on Mars before you know it,
People always argue about, well, money will be wasted if it turns out UFOs are nonsense, which we've already established they're not, or they're an atmospheric phenomenon or whatever. No, that's so false. Money's never wasted. In my own field, let's say there's no dark matter. Also, we wasted our time. No, because we could do neutrino physics. We can do other kinds of physics with the same technology. So what other things will we discover with the Skywatch program? What if we discover meteorological effects we've never heard of that advances scientific progress? Nothing is ever wasted. It's not a waste of time, because that's the argument I'm foreseeing now, is like, oh, because it's all nonsense, we shouldn't be deploying $100 million, 500 sensors. Are you kidding? Imagine all the accidental side effect discoveries we would make that have nothing to do with UFOs. I'll give, I mean, I can't talk about it again because of NDA. You'll see at SCU, we made an accidental discovery on UAPX. I can't even tell you what it is because I don't want to get sued, but you'll see in SCU, we made accidental scientific discovery completely unrelated to UAP, related to meteorology that just scared, that surprised us all. And it was just an accident. Because sometimes that's how science goes, is sometimes instead of eureka, instead what you say is, huh, you know, like Robbie said when the muon particle was discovered, who ordered that? Why do we need muons? You don't fit in the, you know, you don't belong in atoms. So I think that we'll make accidental discoveries, at first at least, that have nothing to do with UFOs, because of what a general good idea it is to have Skywatcher sensors. It's just a general good idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's unforeseen what new, you know, you look at, like in the 1940s, they were studying primitive ideas about semiconductors and the quantum mechanics, and they finally figured out how a junction, you know, works. And then they finally came up with the first transistor. Mm-hmm. And look what happened. It changed the entire world. I mean, you know, solid state electronics and microorganization. I mean, it's just like revolutionary. I mean, this is incredible. I mean, everything we have around us, you know, we wouldn't be talking on these, if you had a tubes, you know, you wouldn't be talking over, this channel on your computer like this, you know, and the internet.
Exactly.
You know,
I mean, these are all great examples. Another great example is antimatter. Who cares about antimatter, right? Except nowadays, 90 years after it's discovered, we use it to treat cancer, right? To find cancerous tumors in PET scans. Again, you know, who knows what practical applications come out of doing basic science, about funding basic science.
Yeah. Well, guys, I want to cut in for just a second because we got like 4 minutes left, and you know, maybe we could just conclude if everyone wants to just say anything they want briefly. I'll go first, and I'll tell you one thing that I got out of this discussion is I think that one thing I'm hearing pretty clearly is that if the field wants to advance as rapidly as possible, that something along the lines of an international scientific congress on this topic would be really important. Because Matt, I hear you saying we need to put aside our egos, we need to get unified, and I also think, quite frankly, the thing that I'm still not convinced that there's going to be enough money flowing into this, and it seems to me that if you had a unitary organization, you could somehow manage this. That would really help push things, because it seems like part of it's kind of a political problem almost. That's what I got out. But anybody else? Bruce, you want to go next, and maybe we can just go around, and anything anyone wants to say, just probably not talk too long.
I think we're surveyors on the new American continent. We've got our moccasins on, we've got our sextant and our surveying equipment, and we just have to hit the forest. You know, all of the political stuff and the monetary stuff, it's going to have to work itself out somehow. But we're curious people, and we want to know what the hell's going on. So get out of my way.
Matt, anything you want to throw in before we wrap up?
Sure. So just to break out of the cycle of chicken and egg funding, what we got to do is what we did in my experience, what we did in UAPX, we went with a shoestring budget, MacGyvered a lot of equipment together. Well, some of it more than MacGyvered, good, expensive, and just stop arguing about doing stuff and let's just go do it. Like Bruce said, let's start taking data and more data, get the ball rolling. And the last thought that I'll share with everyone with that theme of conferences, I highly recommend to all of our listeners here that they try to go to the SCU conference in Huntsville, Alabama in June, organized by Rich Hoffman. I really think, and I believe, Robert, right? You're co-organizing, right? Or Peter, I'm sure you're involved too. Like, I strongly recommend, not just for the talk that I'll be giving with Kevin Knuth on UAPX, for all the talks, the amazing talks that are lined up. Earlier I mentioned University of Würzburg. I saw that Rich Hoffman scored that guy to come talk about the world's first department at a university that's actually doing this. And so like I strongly recommend that people do this. It's a step in the right direction. There aren't still not enough scientists, I think, because too many scientists still think it's nonsense. So you still don't have enough scientists, I think, at something like the SCU conference, but it's a start. The SCU conference series that's been started in Huntsville, Alabama, the last few years is pushing us in the right direction. I hope to see many of you on this call actually there. It'll be nice to see people in person there, and it'll be nice to rediscover that people have lower halves of their faces. I really look forward. Since obviously I'm pro-science, I'm fully vaccinated and boosted. I look forward to safely seeing many of you here in this summer in Huntsville.
All right.
I'll ditto what Matthew said on the SCU conference. It's also available virtually, so you can see it through the internet without having to be there in person. And actually, all of our speakers, I believe, other than Ryan Graves, the ex-Navy pilot, all of our other speakers are PhDs in various scientific fields. So it will be a great conference. And the last thing I'll say is if it turns out, right, and like we've said, we don't know what UAPs are exactly, but if it did turn out to be extraterrestrial from another civilization, that would be one of the, as Matthew said, the most greatest thing that would have happened in human history. So even if you think that's a very small possibility, you have to give that weight based on its impact to society. So, and that's kind of my conclusion.
Absolutely. I'll finish up, I guess. One thing I think, if we can get, like if Matthew talked about, or SCU or Avialo, we can come up with some kind of a test station that's reasonably in cost, $4,000 or $5,000, $6,000 or something, and they're all made identically, and we can distribute them throughout the country. I think we have a really good chance of proving these things are real, and I don't think money then would be a problem. The model I have is like SETI at home, which we had a screensaver that helped look for exoplanets, and that went on for years. And I think that if the UFO community is huge, and I think that small donations would come in, like if we had something solid, would come in a lot, and there'd be a lot of money. But with money goes responsibility, and I wouldn't want to be party to anything that wasn't well organized and and was done properly. But I think there's a lot of hope for citizen science in that area. So I'll say that.
Good. Well, this has been really fun. And thank you to everybody who was watching this and commenting and things like that. Really appreciate it. Sorry if I couldn't fit in some of the questions, but really appreciate it. And we plan to do more of these in the future. I think it might be different, shifting around the composition of the panel and things like that. But any feedback, people that watch, if you want to leave feedback up on the SCU website or whatever, really appreciate that. And yeah, I think that's about it. So I will end this now, and everyone have a great evening.
Thanks, Matt.